Welcome back to my channel. So today I am coming back with a book video. I have been wanting to do more book videos for a few months now, but I just haven't been doing them. If you are new to my channel or you haven't seen any of my videos, you somehow randomly stumbled upon this video, I am moving to South Korea in about 2 weeks, little less than 2 weeks. And I had a mission to complete all of the books that I had owned. So my owned TBR, which TBR means to be read. I really just did not want to take any books with me that I hadn't read yet. And I also didn't want to leave any unread or unfinished books behind. So for the past 3 years, I've been really good at not buying books, and I've been able to keep my TBR pile less than 10, which is like just a pat on the back, because high school and middle school me was horrible at not having control over all the books that I bought and then also never reading them. So the first book I picked up was The Witch of Portobello by Paulo Coelho, and I have been dying to read, not really dying, I've been wanting to read more from this author ever since I read The Alchemist, which is his most well-known story. I read that back in 2018, I believe, and I really loved it. The Witch of Portobello is about a woman named Athena. The really cool thing about this is that you never actually read from her perspective, because she's supposed to remain as this mysterious, intriguing woman, and instead you read from multiple perspectives of people she encounters throughout her life, and they're from all different backgrounds. She meets them all over the world, from different fields of work, and it's just so fascinating to read about this one woman from multiple perspectives and getting to see kind of like how complex an individual can be just based on like interactions with other people. Like, some of them were in love with Athena, some of them have a grudge against her, some of them were her teachers, some of them she taught. The thing that I really like about Paulo Coelho's stories is that they're very philosophical. So if you're into that kind of stuff, I would highly recommend checking him out. If you're not into that kind of stuff, I'm not sure I would recommend checking them out. I would say I did prefer The Alchemist over The Witch of Portobello, just because The Witch of Portobello feels like a very passive story, and whereas The Alchemist is more of like, it has more action. You have this really dynamic character who is going on this adventurous mission, whereas this story, you don't really know where it's going to end, because you're following this woman through other people's eyes, and yeah, you don't really know the direction the story is supposed to be taking, and so you're kind of just like going with the flow. To me, while I was reading it, it didn't really have like a concrete goal. So this definitely has more of a passive approach in terms of like, I guess, plot, but I don't consider passive to be bad, because I think it worked really well for this story in particular. But even though I wasn't in love with this one, I still ended up getting something out of it, which is what I truly enjoy. So I think I gave it 3.5 stars out of 5, which some people might say is like, did you really like it? But in my like ratings, anything 3.5 and above, I typically really enjoy. Okay, and then the next book that I read, which I just realized is kind of similar to The Witch of Portobello in a few ways, is The Vegetarian by Han Kang. And this is also a translated work. So The Witch of Portobello, Paulo Coelho is a Brazilian author, so of course he writes in Brazilian Portuguese, and then this was translated from Korean. And then another thing that I realized while I was reading this was that this story also, you don't read from like the main character's perspective. This is about a woman named Young-hee who has this really brutal and bloody dream, and then when she wakes up, she decides to give up all meat products, and she doesn't consume any animal products, anything like that. She rejects society norms, and then in doing so, she's judged by everybody around her, and people try to manipulate her both physically and mentally into becoming normal again. So this actually follows 3 different perspectives, which I didn't know. I thought it only followed one, but it follows her husband, and then it follows her brother-in-law, and then it follows her sister. Whereas like The Witch of Portobello, I really loved reading from all of the different perspectives. For this story in particular, I feel like only one perspective was actually interesting to read from, and that was her husband. The first part 1 was more interesting, but as I got into part 2, I was just kind of disturbed and repulsed, and then part 3 I was just like, what's the point in this? I wish the story was written from maybe half her husband's perspective and then half of her own perspective, because whereas we got a really clear, or at least a decent understanding of Athena in The Witch of Portobello, for this story I don't really know who Young Hee is. From the beginning to the end, I just don't really understand. I don't see her as a person. I think the author may have done that intentionally, because throughout like the second half of this novel, she's trying to literally become like a plant and she's like losing her humanity day by day. And so I guess I understand why we didn't get her perspective, but then I think, well, what if we got her perspective from the very beginning? Once she has that dream, and then the second half is from her husband's perspective. I think that would have been more intriguing to read about. This I gave about 2 stars. What I did enjoy reading about was how within this story, the idea how we are kind of conformed and manipulated from a young age to normalize specific things that our society deems normal in a way. A lot of us kind of go with what society tells us, and then as we get older, as we learn more, as we experience more, we kind of develop our own individual morals or our own individual mindsets. Most of us do, at least. But like this idea that society kind of conforms us into normalizing certain things and then like degrading other things, that message was very clear in this story. However, I can get that message in other stories that are less frustrating than this one. Next story I read was Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This is a YA fantasy. I read her Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy back in high school, and I thought it was okay. Whenever I pick up a story from her, I know I'm going to read about something I don't expect, and I'm just going to be thrust into this world that I could never imagine for myself. I just think she has a very unlimited and boundless idea when it comes to world building and character developments, and that is probably my favorite aspect about her stories. In saying that, I just never really end up loving the plots. So this is a story about a junior apprentice librarian named Laszlo, and he is obsessed with fairy tales. He loves fairy tales, and he loves mythology within this world, and in particular he really loves reading about this city that he calls the Unseen City, and it's the city that basically disappeared 200 years ago, I believe. It doesn't really come into contact with other people. No people can really go into it. And then one day, these warriors, these well-known warriors from the city travel to where he lives, looking to collect people to help them solve this problem in their city. And he's one of the people that is chosen to go. And when he gets to the Unseen City, he has this dream about this blue-skinned goddess. He wants to uncover like what are all the secrets that the city is hiding, what happened, why is he there, who is this blue-skinned goddess, etc. And that's kind of like the gist of the story. So this follows 2 different perspectives mainly. It follows Laszlo, and then it also follows the blue-skinned goddess that appeared in Laszlo's dream. I feel like not a lot of things happened in this story. I wish we had more of some suspense and some drama and some action within like the plot. The story, it had great characters, and while it was really fun reading about their backstories, getting like these glimpses into their past, I just feel like it was so repetitive. I'm just gonna say, like, I'm not really a big fan of big books, so this is, I believe, a little under 500 pages. No, it's a little over 500 pages. Anything over 450 pages, it's very hard for me to love it. I just really like my smaller books, or my average size books. even for stories that I really love. I just don't really care about big books because I feel like there's so much stuff that could easily be cut out. While the ending was really, really good, I did enjoy the ending. I'm just not really invested enough in the story or these characters to see what happens next. So yeah, will not be continuing on. Okay, the next book I picked up was Nothing to Envy: Ordinary Lives in North Korea by Barbara Demick. I really enjoy reading biographies and memoirs from North Korean defectors. I have two right here that I read that I really, really enjoyed. It has like a lot of history and important like events that happened within North Korea. I wasn't caring as much for the characters as I was for like the individual stories I read, and yeah, it just wasn't really my kind of thing. So I ended up DNFing this book. I kind of completed my own TBR, so this is the one book I told myself, you know what, I'm gonna DNF because I don't really want to finish this. This next book is Lilac Girls by Martha Hall Kelly. So this is the one book that I read that I gave 5 stars, and this is a story in which it follows 3 different perspectives. There's a lot of perspectives going on here. It follows 3 different perspectives during World War II. It follows Caroline, who is a woman from New York City, and she's an ex-Broadway actress, and she now works for the French consulate. And then it follows Kasia, I think that's how you say her name, who is a Polish teenager who joins this underground resistance movement in her country after the Nazis take over. And then it follows Herta, who is a young German doctor who finds herself trapped within this Nazi-controlled, male-dominated field of work. Herta's perspective, like predicted, was very different from the other 2. And she was my least favorite person to read from, not because I think she was a bad perspective to read from, but there were just, you know, a few times where I wanted to maybe smack her with the book. So I think my favorite part about this story and why I like love it so much is that we actually follow the characters. So usually in World War II stories, you follow a character like a year or 2 before the war breaks out, and then you follow them all throughout the war, and then maybe a year or 2 after the war ends. And so the main part of the time that you have with them is during the war. Whereas in this story, that's the same. The majority of this is set during the war times, but then the war is over and you get to follow these characters for a decade more, and you get to see how they basically live after such a traumatic event. Once you know, okay, the war's over, nobody else is gonna die, these characters that are still alive, they're safe, everything's gonna be okay for them, we can start having a happy life again, go back to before the war. And you start to realize, along with the characters, that just because the war is over doesn't mean that life is going to be okay. The author does a fantastic job at really depicting how the impact of World War II has on these characters' mentalities, and how they can't just go back to what life was before. So the physical fighting is over, but they're still left with this devastation. So yeah. Okay, and then the last book that I have is actually a book that I bought last week. Like, I told myself, I can't buy this book unless I finish all of my other books. And that is The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. So this is a YA fantasy again, urban fantasy kind of as well, like it has urban elements to it, but it's mainly YA fantasy, and it is the 3rd book in the Folk of the Air trilogy. It's not like anything that I've never read before, but it is just so addictive and so fun to read that it's by far one of my favorite YA trilogies I've ever read. So I'm not going to go into too much detail because this is the 3rd book in the trilogy, but this is the first book, which is The Cruel Prince, which I have up there, but I'm not going to get it. It follows a girl named Jude who we first meet eating, what is it, fish sticks, I think, in the beginning, watching TV, and then this like fairy dude comes in and murders her parents and takes her sisters and her to this fairyland. While she hates Fae, but at the same time, she can't help but want to grow and climb the social ladder in order to prove that humans aren't just like weak little pets that can easily be controlled or manipulated by the fairy population. And so this is a YA, and so you gotta have some angsty romance usually in this. Introduce Prince Carden, who is this Fae prince. He's the youngest, manipulative, and he's just really angsty. He's got a really bad past life that doesn't justify his actions presently, but yeah, you have him. And Jude and Carden hate each other, and they are continuously throughout these stories trying to win over the other, which is quite fun to read about. So ensues drama, deception, political stuff, fighting, killing, that kind of thing. And so yeah, that is the gist of the Cruel Prince Folk of the Air trilogy, this being the last. So this is actually a very short book. This is the shortest in the entire trilogy. And it seems like as the trilogy progressed, each book got shorter and shorter than the previous. I've heard kind of mixed reviews about this finale and that it wasn't as great as they wanted it to be, and etc. And a lot of people commented on how short it was. It was still really well written. It had a very progressive plot line, and the character, you still got to see the complexity of all of the characters. You got to learn more about them and more about the world as well. And so overall, I think it did have everything that it would if it was just like 100 pages longer. I will say this was probably my least favorite out of the trilogy. I ended up giving this 4 stars. While I did thoroughly enjoy it and it was still addictive as the other two, I just think the other two had a bit more drama, it had more suspense, and the climactic elements within the other two had higher stakes, and you really you weren't sure what was going to happen, who was going to survive, like how would the characters get past this. It did have the angst, the sarcasm, the suspense, and the magic, and just like everything that made the other two books really great. It had all of that, but it was a bit more subdued, I think in part because it was short and it was more to the point. And this felt more like the end of an arc, whereas like The Cruel Prince, the first book in the series, felt more like, okay, an introductory, and then The Wicked King, the second book, felt more of like the climactic part of the entire story, and then this felt like the ending arc. I did predict the ending of this story, however, it was an ending that I wanted to happen anyways, so I'm not upset about that. I really enjoyed these characters, I really enjoyed this world and this story, and I would love to see more stories that are set in this world, and yeah. So wouldn't be opposed to that. Those are all of the stories that I finished in December, January, and the first week of February. And I have now completed my TBR pile, and I've now read all the books that I own, which I can't say I've done that in a while. So pat on the back. So that's all I have for this video, and I will see you in my next. Bye.